And now we come to the speech at hand. The quality of mercy is not strained. First step, vocab and paraphrase. I will take you through the vocab and general meaning of each line, and then give my own paraphrase of the entire speech at the end. I would call in Shelby's words. Here we go. The quality of mercy is not strained. Shylock has just said, on what compulsion must I? And so Portia's saying the essence of what mercy is cannot be compelled. It can't be forced. It droppeth as the gentle rain from heaven upon the place beneath. So she's setting up an antithesis here, meaning a contrast. The quality of mercy, mercy in its essence, state, is not forced, is not labored, is not strained. Instead, it drops like the gentle rain from heaven upon the place beneath, place meaning earth. So mercy can't be forced, it just drops. And in your voice, you can reflect that as well. Strained, droppeth. Just so much onomatopoeia in Shakespeare. And the more you can act on the line, act on the word, taste the word, and let it be that image just for what it is in the moment, that's where the magic is. It is twice blessed. It blesseth him that gives and him that takes. So mercy is not forced. It is effortless, and it's a gift to both the person who gives it and the person who receives. It is twice blessed, or gives a double blessing. 'Tis mightiest in the mightiest. So we've been talking about mercy as not forced, but very light, gentle. But now it's saying it's mightiest in the mightiest. So it's coming back to a heavier image, and might just meaning strong. Not only is it gentle, but it's strong at the same time. It becomes the throned monarch better than his crown. So it meaning mercy, and then becomes, mercy is adorning someone, and it becomes them. It looks good on them better than a crown would. Mercy looks better on a king than a crown does. And we say throned monarch because of the scansion. The throned monarch better than his crown. So that's iambic pentameter, another video. But just know that it's the throned monarch. It keeps it in the iambic pentameter meter. So she has this image she's now brought in of a king. Then she goes on to explain. His scepter shows the force of temporal power. Scepter, like a king has a scepter. When someone has that, it shows the force, the impact of temporal power. Temporal meaning earthly and also of a certain time, also at temporary power. The attribute to awe and majesty, wherein does sit the dread and fear of kings. Talking about a scepter, he's got the mask and the outfit of a king who has power. The attribute to awe and majesty. So this scepter is an attribute. It's an accessory that projects awe, projects fear, and majesty meaning respect and glory. So this whole pageantry is where the dread and fear of kings happens, because they have the look and everything in the right place. It then strikes fear in their subjects and maybe in the other world powers of the time. Kings are also mighty, but because of outward things. But mercy is above this sceptered sway. If you sway someone, you are persuading them. There's a power, there's an influence. So a sceptered sway, it's just bringing back that image of a scepter. So the power they have from the scepter and other kind of adornments that would become a king. Mercy is above the sceptered sway. So whatever the royals have, mercy is above that. It is enthroned, meaning enthroned. Again, it's another one of those stretched words. It is enthroned in the hearts of kings. So there might be an outwardness of, here, look, I'm a king, I look like a king. Mercy is in the king's hearts. And it is an attribute, a trait, a personality trait of God himself. It is an attribute to God himself. An earthly power, the kings, doth then show likest gods when mercy seasons justice. So a king can have all of the trappings, but unless mercy is in his heart, he's not a good king. We talk about that, the heart of the king, heart of a lion, and even the story of King Arthur, this idea of scrappy people who are good and warm-hearted are the ones who become the worthy legendary kings. And within that heart would be mercy. It is enthroned in the hearts of those kings. And therefore, likest gods, meaning that is the divine part of them. So maybe it's also saying that the part of God that is in you as a king is mercy and grace and justice. Now, after she's waxed poetical a bit, still in an urgent way, because we can never get lost in this imagery. That is the trap I'm talking about, okay? She is talking about these beautiful images, but this is the biggest trap that happens with this piece. It's not urgent enough. When we read it out of context, oh, mercy, it's above the separate sway. Oh, that's so pretty. Lovely, lovely. But no, the whole reason she's speaking, her objective is to save someone's life. She will appeal to them so hard about the nobility and godlike nature that mercy has on earth, so that they will dissolve their claim on someone's life. So it can be gorgeous, which it is, but it also has to be urgent. And I'm so excited you won't fall into that trap. Good job. If you'd like to see an example of a performance of this speech with that urgency in mind, check out mine. Performance idea here. When I do this speech, I love looking around, seeing the courtroom, because it gives me a little bit more as an actor to overcome that the courtroom is very packed and very loud, as if the whole town knows about this bond gone wrong and wants to see how it shakes out. So when I start this speech, as the actor, I'm deciding to get everyone's attention with my first line as if the room is very loud. So in one production's interpretation, maybe it's so quiet and so private that you can hear a pin drop, and that's the dramatic tension. And from that place, you can begin the quality of mercy is not strained. Film version of quality of mercy. But I've made the performance decision that in my imaginary play that I'm in when I'm doing this monologue, the courtroom is very loud and very busy. And I then have to get everyone's attention and also shut down Shylock, who just yelled at me as Portia. Also doesn't mean that Shylock has to yell, but there are a lot of performance choices within this moment that actors can make. When you're preparing a monologue for an audition, you are the play. That's why we talk about 3 chunks a little bit later. We talk about beginning, middle, end. Your monologue is a tiny play that has a beginning, middle, end. You need to show auditors that you have a journey that you go on. And so if you are a mini play, then you also get to build the set, the imaginary set. So my set for this is a loud courtroom in which Portia, as a woman who has never been able to have her own voice, finally uses it, maybe so loudly that it surprises even her, to talk about something as gentle and maybe feminine as mercy. So now we get to the end. She's set up the thesis statement, she's explained it, and then she has therefore Jew. So we're back to Shylock. She's been speaking this to him the whole time, but I think it's fascinating. Shakespeare sidebar. I think it's fascinating that the word Jew is brought back in, because it indicates that Shakespeare's audience, who at the time was all Christian, may have been the people that Portia was actually talking to. What she's been talking about is also speaking to the Christian sensibilities in the room, and he's challenging them as well. Not just glorifying them of, oh, you drop us like the gentle rain from heaven. He's asking them to think about this specific question. Therefore, Jew, though justice be thy plea, consider this, that in the course of justice, none of us should see salvation. So you're asking for your bond to be honored. It is your legal right. But she poses a moral question. If you're asking for justice, none of us should see salvation. That's another thesis statement. So the quality of mercy is not strained. Let's get clear on the definition of mercy and how it works in the world. This second thesis statement, this idea of none of us should see salvation, is a very Christian principle of the only way to have salvation is through God's mercy. We do pray for mercy. And that same prayer doth teach us all to render the deeds of mercy. This references the Lord's Prayer. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. Forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors, that idea. I cannot ask for mercy unless I also give it. But as Portia's bringing up these Christian sensibilities, it begs the question whether what she's doing is actually extremely Christian or not. Is she doing the Christian thing, the good thing, when what she's doing is inherently serving her own desires? Yes, she's attempting to save a man's life, but she, with all her wealth and privilege, has she ever done anything to try and help someone like Shylock? who is treated like a second-class citizen his whole life, even though he is every bit as human as everyone else. Earlier in the play, he says a now extremely famous line, "If you prick us, do we not bleed?" Harold Bloom, one of the foremost Shakespeare critics, who also happens to be Jewish, says in one of his essays that he sees Antonio and Portia as self-betrayers who should have done better. And he notes that in the Gospel of John, instead of being cited as descendants of Abraham, it says that Jews are the children of Satan. That verse taken out of context is very dangerous. It has been consistently used to promote anti-Semitic views as recently as the mass shooting in Pittsburgh at the synagogue in 2018, during which one of the gunmen was reportedly yelling, "All Jews must die," and on his social media profile, he had that Bible verse quoted. And I actually used to walk by that synagogue because I lived in that neighborhood for 4 years in my undergrad. So yet again, Shakespeare is not only relevant, but also strikingly topical and more urgent than ever. So this line about you can't hope for mercy and not give it is pointing out to Shylock that he's raising a double standard or a hypocrisy. But the piousness of this particular group of Christians, and maybe the Christians he was speaking to in a larger context in his audience, also presents a double standard. All this to say, our perception of Shylock's plea being like crazy and extreme begins to change and dissolve once we understand the circumstances from which he has asked for the bond and is demanding that it be honored. Whether we agree with him or not that he should kill Antonio, we do begin to see the justification for why he's asking for this, because the law is finally on his side for the first time. And if he wants to go through with this, he can. This bond is legally binding, and everyone in the courtroom knows it, including Portia. So then she ends with, "I have spoke thus much to mitigate the justice of thy plea." So plea, the suit that he has brought to the court, mitigate the justice of it. She's using justice again, and she has used it many times before now. And sometimes when you say a word over and over again and it loses its meaning, or it sounds a little weird. So I think that's part of the text that was happening. We're just driving it home of what justice really means. And she's trying to mitigate it, meaning lessen, make it less severe, to alleviate it. She's trying to reason with him this whole time. So she reminds him that this is what I'm trying to do with you. And if we can't mitigate the justice of your plea, this strict court of Venice, strict meaning by the book, even if I wanted to, I couldn't change the law in this moment. There's no interpretation to be had. This strict court of Venice must needs give sentence. We have to sentence, honor your bond, say that this man is guilty against the merchant there. So, quality of mercy. She talks about mercy in general. Maybe she's even talking to the entire court. You can decide that as a performer of how public or private this first portion is. Therefore, Jew, she speaks right to Shylock as a last attempt to really get through to him. And then she brings it back to against the merchant there. And we all then look at Antonio one more time. And then it's Shylock's decision. What does he do after? Do you want to know what happens after? You should watch the play. But first, let's do the full paraphrase, okay? So, in my words, mercy inherently can't be forced. It naturally falls like rain and benefits the one who gives it and the one who receives it. It is the most powerful action and a more impactful accessory on a king than the crown he wears. The royal staff he holds reminds everyone that he has power on earth, but mercy exceeds that material pomp and circumstance. God himself has mercy. So when we show mercy here on earth, we become godlike. So if you're looking for justice, think about it. If everyone started demanding justice, no one would be innocent. We all need to receive mercy. So that means we all need to give mercy. I've said all this to make you reconsider how much justice there really is in your request, a request that if you insist on pursuing because it is technically legal of you to do so, will result in this man's death. And then there's that lovely moment after of, what are you going to do, man? Yes, so now you understand what the speech is about. Yes. Okay, so now let's do the 3 chunks, which is really just thinking of your speech as a beginning, middle, end, and then assigning one word to each so that it makes sense in your brain and it can help you remember it a little bit more. Remember the journey that this character and this text goes through. So I'm going to do 3 chunks. And as we're just reviewing what we know about this speech, you think of your own word for each of these chunks, and I'll tell you mine at the end. So for me, the first chunk is hold up. This is the definition of mercy. And also the imagery with which she speaks it mirrors that of the quality of mercy. Gentle, smooth, gliding. You know, kings are like this, but mercy. It's this beautiful opportunity to lean into what could melt someone's heart and make them change their mind. So the second chunk for me begins, therefore, Jew, and is through render the deeds of mercy. Let's get back to the thesis of this. Let's go from a place of imagery to a place of rational thought and logical persuasion. And then the third chunk, I have spoke thus much to mitigate the justice of thy plea. I just found a very exciting textual thing that completely supports the urgency of this speech and negates this trap that people get in of thinking it's this beautiful, flowy thing. On my copy of this, there is 1 end stop punctuation, meaning the verse line, these columns where it indents down, each of those are called a verse line. And quite an easy way sometimes to find what the chunks are is to find where at the end of the verse line is what I call an end stop punctuation. So a period, an exclamation point, or a question mark, right? Where it's the end of a thing. But here in the edition that I have, and punctuation can be very different depending on different editions, but the one I'm looking at right now, the first time there is an end stop punctuation is against the merchant there, the very last line of the speech, which means something like to be or not to be, very contemplative, has quite a few end stops. He's thinking things through. He's taking his time. But this, every punctuation is semicolon, comma. It's go, go, going. Because maybe the actor playing Shylock is constantly trying to get a word in. And so Portia cannot let anything like that happen. I've made the performance decision that once I have the room and have their attention, I am holding their attention, which is just as active. But I love that piece of textual discovery because that gives you the clue that it's not stopping. This argument has to be held to be clear and effective. So sometimes there's 3 end stop punctuations and it's very clear to see kind of what the 1, 2, 3 is. And when I say 3 chunks, I mean a temperature change in the speech. And the more we define those sections, the more we can get very specific about how she's attempting to get through to this person in different ways. And having 3 chunks or 3 words really helps me as an actor make sure that I'm specific, make sure that I have an actionable thing to do, and make sure that it's diverse as far as how I'm going about it. Okay, discovery number 2, the end stop punctuation, the stuff over here, the only one that there is that ends in a period is at the very end. So then I was like, where are the other periods in the speech? And the only other periods in this version is after when mercy seasons justice, before therefore Jew, which is what I said is my second chunk. The next period, the only other one, is after deeds of mercy, before I have spoke thus much. Within the text, it tells you where those temperature changes are with the punctuation. Punctuation is slightly fluid because even with me having kind of a first folio facsimile of the script, there wasn't a formalized codified way in which to have a comma here, period here. MLA guidelines did not exist. So that's why we have such a variance in punctuation. And you just have to know that punctuation is put in by editors, informed ones, but still. So they had a choice in making that punctuation, and so do you. You just need to make sure to review multiple editions before you make your own choice so that it is also informed. But this is super cool. So I love this, and it completely justified my gut on what the 3 chunks are. So do you have 3 words, 1 for each of the chunk? Put them in the comments below. I would love to see what your interpretation is of that. For me, the first chunk is melt. I want to melt Shylock. The temperature in the room is very, very high, and I want to melt everyone into thinking about mercy. So for the second chunk, my word is warn. I want him to be very clear about what he's doing. So don't do this rashly. because just like when we give mercy, we receive it. When you give revenge, you get revenge, that kind of a thing. So I like this idea of warning Shylock. As much as you can make your words about the other person, the more actionable it is. For the third chunk, my word would be rest, as in the defense rests, the prosecution rests. I feel like it becomes very formal. And within arrest, you are speaking to the jury, you are appealing one last time to the room at hand, but it's more public. I go from warning one person to resting. I don't think rest is quite as active as I would like, but what it gives me is a reminder of my environment, which I think is helpful. She's certainly not resting because she is awaiting with bated breath to see what Shylock says. But she has done what she has come here to do and has laid it all out on the line. The defense rests and waits to see what happens. So my 3 words are melt, warn, and rest. Wow, thank you so much for being with me on this journey through this speech. The more I grow up and the more I revisit this speech and just do Shakespeare in general, let alone live in this world, the more relevant and devastating and complex not only this play, but this speech becomes. And I thank you for coming along with me as we're exploring those very complex themes. And if you don't perform monologues, I hope you thoroughly enjoyed the analysis and the historical context. And I wonder if it brought up any questions for you in your own life, because that's what theater is supposed to do. Make sure to click the subscribe button. Whoop!